We live in a world where the past is not really the past. It lingers in the institutions that we inherit, the wealth that we accumulate or lack, and the stories that we tell about ourselves. The legacy of slavery and racial injustice in this country is not a distant memory, but a present reality woven into the disparities that we see in education, in housing, in healthcare, in economic opportunity. To acknowledge this is not to dwell in guilt, but to embrace responsibility, the responsibility to repair, to heal, and to build a more just society. Reparations are not about punishing one group to reward another. They're about telling the truth and setting things right, just as we would repair a home. Damaged by neglect, we repair a nation still burdened by the consequences of centuries of exploitation. Economic justice is not charity, it's justice. We have the resources, the knowledge, and the moral obligation to invest in communities that were systematically denied opportunity. To do so is not just an act of restitution. It's an affirmation of who we aspire to be as a people. Well, some will say, but I didn't cause this harm, not my fault. That may be true, but we all inherit the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. The question is not whether we are personally to blame, but whether we are willing to take part in the healing. America's greatness is not found in its ability to ignore the past, but in its courage to confront it. Reparations are not about what is owed, they're about what's possible. And what's possible when we act with justice in our heart is a future where dignity and opportunity are shared by all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, John. That was great. And I have to say that the congregation, your singing is stellar. Yeah, wow. Anyway, so our two presenters today are very prominent members of the South Bend community and of the Community Forum for Economic Justice and for the South Bend Reparations Working Group. And Marty, I call him the great explainer. He has the ability to take pretty complex stuff, at least that seems complex to me, and make it simple. And of course, Nimbi has lived a lot of this, and she is here for her emotional appeal. So, Nimbi, I'm really looking forward to what you have to say today. So with that, I'll just let you guys come up and do your thing.
So I want to start by saying thank you for receiving us, and to say to my friend John Hagan that he's made my talk unnecessary. You said it so well in much fewer words than I have written here. I'm moved by what we've shared here this morning already, our hurts, our sorrows, some joys, and grateful for a safe place to share those feelings and to feel the support that by the time you get to be my age, you've experienced some of what most said, but for the woman whose nephew has a brain tumor. We can't sometimes imagine so many hardships that people are dealing with every day. And the mother whose son now has to be replaced or moved when they thought they had a place that was good for him. So I'm just moved by the sharing, and it says that this is a place where there is grace. Where's the man who mentioned grace? Because I'm counting on that this morning.
That's her name.
Okay. Well, there's this other kind of grace, thank you, that I'm counting on. And so I'm so happy to see so many friends that I have here through League of Women Voters. Ann Howing, I know your name just from seeing it on the screen, and now I know you by face, and so I'm just grateful for that. And I am going to, since I've already gone over the time that I had, I'm now going to read word for word so that I don't mess up anything else. My name is Nimbi Cushing. Everyone calls me Nimbi. I'm the president of the South Bend Reparations Working Group, and my friend Marty Wolfson here is the vice president. John Hagan is, I don't know, our archivist, our historian, our, give him a name, and he does a lot of research. He's kept us on task with a lot of things. And Karen Nye, who doesn't want to be acknowledged at all, thank you, is sitting back there. And I mentioned Karen, she is the correspondence secretary. She does everything from we have some flyers and handouts back there someplace. They wouldn't be there except for Karen, so I'm sorry, but you don't get off the hook. So what we are all about is captured by our mission statement, which Francisco already shared, but I'll repeat it again. Our statement says to advocate for reparations at the local, state, and federal level as a way of acknowledging and repairing the harm caused by historic and current injustices experienced by African Americans, descendants of slavery, and its aftermath. This harm has persisted for an extensive period. In the June 2014 issue of the Atlantic magazine, Ta-Nehisi Coates opened his essay that's now been given some award, titled "The Case for Reparations," with these stark words which highlight the deep-rooted nature of the harm. He said, 250 years of slavery, 90 years of Jim Crow, 60 years of separate but equal, 35 years of racist housing policy. Until we reckon with our compounding moral debts, America will never be whole. While these truths are painful to confront, acknowledging them is crucial. Denying them undermines a chapter of history of these United States. Representative John Conyers, a Democrat of Michigan, first introduced House of Representatives Bill H.R. 40 to Congress in 1989. The bill, named for the 40 acres and a mule promise, would establish a commission to study and develop reparation proposals for African Americans. For the next 30 years, until his retirement, he reintroduced the bill at each new House of Representatives session. I just can't get past this part that all he was asking for was a commission to study it. That's all. He never got that. Congressman Conyers died in 2019. That same year, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, a Democrat of Texas, reintroduced H.R. 40. The Honorable Congresswoman has since died. Who then, if anyone, will take up the reins to continue the push of this bill? The delay in addressing these issues underscores our government's reluctance to engage in this important discussion. If we look back at our history, there are undeniable truths, including the fact that Thomas Jefferson was a lifelong slaveholder, and yet in 1776, he wrote and signed the Declaration of Independence. We all recite the words of the preamble of that document, which says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are empowered and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." However, the Founding Fathers, made up entirely of white men, did not honor those words. For slaves were not treated as human beings except when it was to the advantage of those who owned them. Thus, in 1787, delegates from both the North and South devised a plan known as the Three-Fifths Compromise. The agreement was that each slave could be counted, not could be, would be counted, as 3/5 a person for the purpose of taxation and representation. It remained law until the passage of the 14th Amendment nearly 100 years later. I always get hung up on that 3/5 of a person, wondering which 3/5, and if I get a choice, do I get to send the belly or the butt or whatever? But most likely not. That's not part of the talk, honestly, but but it does hang me up. I get to 3/5 and I think, how the hell did they, I'm in church. And I said, hell, I'm sorry. Okay, back to script. So in January of 1865, the 13th Amendment was passed, abolishing slavery and setting 4 million people free. General William Sherman met with 20 black ministers in his Savannah, Georgia headquarters. The question of the hour was, how would newly freed black people survive economically after more than 200 years of bondage and unpaid labor? A few days later, Sherman issued Special Field Order Number 15, which would confiscate Confederate land. He later ordered that 40 acres of the land be given to newly freed slaves. 4 months later, after President Lincoln was assassinated, the order was rescinded and the land given back to white Confederates. Andrew Johnson of Tennessee was this nation's 17th president. He was not in favor of Emancipation Proclamation. By the end of 1865, Mississippi had enacted the first black codes. South Carolina followed. Black codes were designed to relegate newly freed slaves back to the position of slavery. The codes dictated that blacks must have written proof of employment. They were imprisoned for vagrancy if they had not been able to establish homes outside the jurisdictions of the plantations where they had been held as slaves. They could get out of prison and work off their fine by doing exactly what they had done prior to being emancipated. 3 years after the advent of black codes, the resurgence of Jim Crow laws came again into play. Jim Crow was a fictitious name coined by a white male performing in blackface during the 1830s and 40s. The combination of black codes and Jim Crow reinstituted slavery without calling it by that name. In 1868, the 14th Amendment made newly freed people citizens. 2 years later, the 15th Amendment gave black men, not women, the right to vote. Historian Professor Darrell Heller, certainly known to many of you and certainly to the South Bend Reparations Working Group, he started all of this. Darrell said, and I quote, "The failure of the government to advance these constitutional edicts and protect the rights of black people is that for which reparations is most significantly owed. Even more so, I believe, than for the 2.5 centuries of slavery, because we could have done something different at that moment." He goes on to say, "Imagine, if you will, what this country would look like if the 4 million newly freed people would have been given consistent support and autonomy. What if they had been given land which would have allowed them to begin accumulating wealth to pass on to their children and the generations that followed? What if former slaves had been given time and space to recover in their own way, according to their expressed needs, from the generations of trauma that 246 years of slavery had inflicted? What if the 14th and 15th Amendments had actually provided the rights and protections that white people enjoyed? What if freed people, newly freed people, could have made claims in court and had their cases judged fairly? What if liberty and justice applied to them as well? What if the democratic process as practiced was fully open to black people who formed the majority of the many counties in the South? What would Congress have looked like, and what kind of priorities would they have made? What if the 15th Amendment had applied to women, black as well as white? What if the voices of these women were part of shaping national policies over the last 150 years? That's the end of Darrell's quote. Sadly, things did not go as they might have, and the consequences of this failure meant that black people were not able to own land, to obtain skills and good jobs, to start their own businesses, and to build the kind of wealth to pass on to their children that white people did. While white people handed down wealth through generations of owning land, blacks have handed down poverty. Generational poverty is a reality for blacks who currently amass 1/10 of the wealth of whites. In 2017, the city of South Bend contracted an organization called Prosperity Now. It's a 12-page document, and it's available online, and it's also noted on one of the handouts that we have brought with us today. The report revealed such facts as the following. The percentage of blacks who own their home is 35% compared to 68% of whites. Blacks had a median household income of $21,000 compared to whites' $41,000. 37% of blacks had zero net worth meaning wealth, compared to 16% of whites. This small sample of data clearly indicates the inequity of the black-white wealth in South Bend, which is the foundation of one's livelihood, including housing, health care, and educational pursuits, to name a few. A timeline of events prepared by author Derek Webb and members of our group, chiefly one, Dr. Monica Tetzloff of IUSB, was principal in working with Derek on this. The timeline indicates the ways in which housing was segregated in South Bend. So, to say now that we will no longer discriminate and run a fair race overlooks the fact that Black people as a group are starting from 100 yards behind the starting line. There have been some cases for reparations in the past few years, despite the absence of any law mandating such actions. We've seen action in Evanston, Illinois in March of 2021, where they selected the first group of Black residents to receive reparations through the city's restorative housing program. The program will distribute $10 million over 10 years. Selected residents have received $25,000 in housing benefits for down payments on homes or home repair. In January 2022, the headlines read, "Princeton Seminary strips slaveholder's name from chapel and vows $27 million in slavery reparations through scholarships and other programs for the descendants of slaves and oppressed people." 3 months later, Harvard University set up a $100 million endowment fund for slavery reparations. The report states that Harvard benefited by free slave labor, slave trade, and business dealings with industries linked to slavery. In each of the 3 cases just mentioned, acknowledgement of injustices was made and actions were taken toward repairing the harm. In South Bend, in September of 2023, the South Bend Common Council appointed a 14-member Reparatory Justice Commission and charged them to deliver a report of their findings 18 months from the date of inception. The commission has a website, again, that's listed on one of our handouts. Their specific assignment was to study aspects of reparatory justice for the harms and injustices experienced by local African Americans and other Black people of African descent as individuals and as a group. Of course, there are many people who have been left out of this nation's prosperity. We support a life of dignity and economic opportunity for all people, but the unique level of discrimination and oppression experienced by Black people is our reason for supporting reparations for those particular harms. Thank you. Oh, I should stay up there.
Well, no,
I'll help answer questions.
Okay, fine. Did you want to come?
yeah, no, actually, yes.
Then I'll do the other.
Yeah, now we'll have a time of questioning. If you have questions,